So I'm taking off tomorrow to drive to California to my brother's farm. So I thought before I left, I'd tell a little heartwarming Thanksgiving story. So, harking back to that peyote story when I got on with the Bureau of Public Roads, we surveyed in Molalla for about a month, and then myself and some of the rest of the crew were sent up to the Mount Baker National Forest in Washington to survey a road there. And it was pretty brutal. It was cold and snowy. We hiked 10 to 12 miles a day, often with a 30-pound bundle of lath on your shoulders, and it was up and down icy slopes and hacking with machetes through forests and traversing these frozen rivers. And when I was finally laid off on about the 20th December, I was in the best and worst shape of my life. And the latter was because the drinking had started its downward spiral. And by that, I don't mean I was doing more of it. That would have been hard to achieve. But the negative effects had doubled to the point where when I drank, I would often wake up still drunk and have to go to work. And, I'd work through the day with this frozen vodka sweat. And so the BPR had a little enclave up there with cabins. And they were two-person cabins. And my roommate was a guy named Chuck. He was an engineering major at Cornell and a great guy. I really liked him. Sorry I lost contact with him. I generally don't do that. Anyway, Thanksgiving came and we were getting a couple days off. So that, obviously we weren't going to have any holiday ourselves. No one had invited us over to eat or anything, and we lived on canned food. So we went into Concrete, the local town, and we had some dinner, and we hit a couple bars, and then we came back to the cabin, and we were drinking gin and tonics. And around 10 o'clock, we were sitting in the front room, and the room was dark, and the TV was on, and I remember we were watching That Girl for some reason with Marlo Thomas, and Chuck was on a couch at the far end of the room, and I was sitting in this old felt armchair, and I was burning up. It was if someone had suddenly turned an electric blanket up as hot as it would go and wrapped me in it. And I couldn't figure out what the hell it was, but I thought, whatever it was, gin will handle it. So the show ends, and Chuck says, I'm going to go to bed. And he gets up and he turns on the overhead light and he goes, "Holy fuck! What the fuck happened to you?" And, I could, even though he yelled, I could barely hear him, because I realized after the TV was turned off, there was this pounding in my ears, the blood pressure, and my tongue is swollen. So I said, "What's that? What's that?" Like Daffy Duck.
Oh, God.
And he jumps over and he runs over and he goes, "It looks like someone poured a can of red paint on you." He said, "Your face, your neck." And he said, "Look, your hands too. They're beet red." And I looked down at my hands and I thought, holy fuck. And so I scurried into the other room where there was a full-length mirror, and I tore my shirt off and stared at myself. And he was right. From the top of my scalp, down my neck, to the middle of my chest, everything was a dark red. And from my hands up to my elbows, I was dark red. And I could watch on my upper arm. It would be, you'd see little red pinprick of blood, of course. and then it would spread like dye in water, and it would flow under the skin until it hooked up with another splotch. And I looked like a fucking lighthouse beacon.
God.
And, Chuck comes over, his eyes are, white as silver dollars. And I said, my back, what about my back? And he goes, what? I can't understand you. And I said, my back, more on my back. And he goes around to my back. Who lives this kind of life? He goes around to my back and he says, God, it's as bad as your front. And then he put his finger up and he touched my shoulder and he said, holy shit. He said, you're hot as hell. And I said, oh, thanks, genius. And then he stepped back and he goes, man, you're not going to explode or anything, are you? He said, I've never seen anything like this. What the fuck's going on? How do you feel? And I said, like a motherfucking furnace. So I hurry over to the door, pull it open, step out on the porch. It's 10 degrees outside and snowing. And as the snow comes down, it hits my skin and then, sizzles and melts. I'm still burning hot out there. And I remember, I stuck my arms up to the heavens and I said, it's fucking Thanksgiving and I've turned into W.C. Fields. So in the morning, the flush had gone. And just the worst hangover I've ever had in my life. I thought I was going to fucking die. And then a couple days later, it happened again. So I went to this old doctor in Concrete. I got an appointment and I go to see this guy and I explained to him what had happened and I was completely honest about the extent of my drug and alcohol intake and my approach to alcoholism, how I was trying to take advantage of it while I was still young. This guy was horrified. And this is coming from a 20-year-old. So he lectured me until he was hoarse. And then he said, though basically what was going on here is my not having that enzyme. We didn't know it then. But he said, basically, you've paralyzed your central nervous system with alcohol. So when your blood level, alcohol blood level reaches, 0.28 to 0.30, if you don't pass out, then all the capillaries nearest the skin open up, and that's that flood of blood you see. And I thought, oh, what a relief. That's not so bad. I'll just drink in dark bars.